There are places in history where the light never reaches, events so warped by silence and fear that even the victors dared not speak of them. Step carefully now. You're about to uncover stories hidden behind false names, scorched files, and unmarked graves. This is not the version taught in classrooms. This is the version whispered in smoke and blood, if at all. Once you hear it, the silence will never feel the same. The winter of 1943 gripped the French countryside with a brittle silence, broken only by the distant murmur of German trucks on the route Departmental 6. Hidden among the bare trees and stone farms of the Verkers Plateau stood Château de Rivel, a seemingly abandoned estate now crawling with the Wehrmacht. Inside its thick walls lay something more threatening than a garrison. Ghost 7, a mobile Enigma encryption unit capable of transmitting orders directly from Berlin. Allied intelligence believed it was testing a fourth rotor variant, one that Bletchley Park couldn't yet crack. Enter Margot Delacour, a 28-year-old Parisian linguist turned crypt analyst. Before the war, she had studied classical literature at the Sorbonne and spent her evenings translating Greek poetry. Now, she served as an agent for the Special Operations Executive. Her orders were simple and suicidal. Infiltrate Château de Rivel, identify the transmission schedule, and smuggle out any cipher materials. Margot assumed the identity of Jean Vasseur, a mute domestic servant from Lyon. A forged ration card, a tattered coat, and a scar carefully etched into her cheek completed the illusion. Her silence wasn't just part of the role, it was protection. Words could betray accents, reveal too much. She washed dishes, emptied ashtrays, and memorized guard rotations, all while the scent of diesel and tobacco filled the castle halls. Unknown to her, the OSS had already planted another operative inside. Lieutenant James Corbin, a radio technician from New Hampshire fluent in German and French, was posing as a Wehrmacht mechanic attached to logistics. He spotted Margot on her second day, eyes meeting briefly as she scrubbed blood from an officer's coat. His recognition was subtle, a pause, a soft nod. Later, he slid a matchbox into a kitchen drawer she frequented. Inside was a single strip of paper. Boiler room, 2 a.m. Bring nothing. That night, among rusted pipes and the rhythmic hiss of steam, they reunited. Corbin spoke first. I've seen the Enigma unit. It's not like the others. There's a fourth rotor. They call it Gehängt Uhr, the hanging clock. He unfolded a crude drawing of the machine from memory. Margot, with her razor memory, memorized the rotor order, plug board configuration, and dial sequences. It wasn't enough. They needed the daily key sheet. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Oberfeldwebel Dieter Albrecht, a 40-something logistics officer whose loyalty to Hitler had faded after his brother was executed for desertion. Margot had noticed his nervous glances, the way his hand trembled when taking orders. One evening, she accidentally spilled wine on his uniform. As she helped him clean it, she whispered, "Ich weiß, was du versteckst. I know what you're hiding." Albrecht didn't report her. Instead, 2 days later, he left a satchel beneath the garden statue of Saint Michael. Inside, a partial code sheet for the following week, a map of the signal room, and a message, "Midnight, during blackout drills. I'll leave the door unlatched." On January 17, 1944, the blackout drill sounded. Sirens wailed, and the chateau lights vanished. Margot, wearing a Wehrmacht cap and cloak borrowed from the laundry, slipped into the signal room. Corbin was already there, his eyes on the Enigma. Together, they worked fast, taking rubbings of rotor positions, sketching wiring patterns, and lifting an entire rotor casing into a potato sack. Suddenly, footsteps. A guard, not part of the plan. Margot froze. Corbin grabbed a fire extinguisher and clubbed the man unconscious. Blood pooled on the tile. They left him breathing, barely, and vanished into the wine cellar tunnel, an escape route Albrecht had quietly marked on their map. The documents and rotor reached London via courier plane from Lyon 2 nights later. Bletchley Park cracked 3 high-level messages using Ghost 7's configuration, uncovering German plans for a counterattack near the Ardennes. But Margot and Corbin weren't out yet. Gestapo agents arrived at Château de Rivel 2 days after the breach. The unconscious guard had survived, but only remembered being struck from behind. They found no evidence, no paper, no prints. Still, suspicion spread. Margot knew her days were numbered. She met Corbin one last time beneath a collapsed barn half a mile from the estate. "We can't stay," she said. "Albrecht's been reassigned. They're watching the house." Corbin handed her a small box. Inside, a compass, a cyanide capsule, and a half-burned photograph of the two of them in Lyon. "Go south. I'll head north. We'll meet in Lisbon." They never would. Margot was captured near the Pyrenees in February. Her execution was recorded only in Gestapo logs. Enemy spy. Female. Terminated without confession. Her last possession? A page torn from the Iliad, hidden in her boot. Corbin survived the war. He testified at Nuremberg, helped rebuild WWII archives, and retired to Vermont. He never married. On his desk, he kept a brass compass, its needle stuck forever pointing west. In 1999, a farmer renovating the ruins of Château de Rivel discovered a rusted tin beneath the kitchen hearth. Inside were pages of code rubbings, a map marked with initials MD, and a single sheet of paper that read, "Even in silence, I spoke." The British government quietly declassified Operation Lantern in 2007. No medals were awarded. No statues raised. But a plaque in the crypt of Werker's cathedral bears Margot's name. Agent, cryptanalyst, poet, never broken. The sun over the Algerian Sahara was a white hammer, pounding endlessly upon the sand, the rocks, and the men. It was April 1943, and the Allied campaign in North Africa was at its apex. Rommel's Afrika Korps had been pushed back. El Alamein was a name already etched into history, and Operation Torch had given the Allies a foothold on the continent. But buried deep in the southern desert, beyond known maps and common sense, was a forgotten campaign, Operation Dustveil. It was never meant to exist. Official documents referred to it only as a logistical diversion. Yet within that illusion, the 9th Armored Desert Group was formed, a ragtag, multinational unit comprised of American tankers, British engineers, and Free French scouts. Their mission, to locate and destroy a mobile Axis fuel convoy hidden in the Saharan interior, protected by Italy's elite and secretive Brigata Fantasma, the Phantom Brigade. Leading the 9th was Captain Elias Boone, a Texas rancher turned tank commander who wore his cavalry hat under his helmet. Boone wasn't a strategist, but he had a gut for terrain and an uncanny ability to smell a trap like a buzzard smells rot. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Thomas Bellamy, was a Royal Engineer obsessed with maps and soil density. Then there was Sergeant Karim El Fassi, a Moroccan Tuareg whose allegiance to France was thin but whose knowledge of the Sahara was unmatched. He didn't wear a uniform. He wore a turban and carried a French MAS rifle older than he was. They departed from Tamanrasset in 3 M3 Stuart tanks, 2 British Matildas, and a dozen supply trucks repainted in sand-dulling hues. Their orders were verbal, not written. Their route, improvised. Each man knew that if captured, they would be disavowed. Within 5 days, they reached the rocky Wadi Saba, where El Fassi reported finding recent tire tracks, German tires, smooth-treaded and fresh. Boone ordered a halt. The team set up a camouflaged position in a dry ravine and began reconnaissance. That night, under a moonless sky, the Phantom Brigade arrived. Italian Fiat trucks, half-tracks, and a strange, boxy vehicle with antennae and fuel drums lashed to its sides. It was a mobile refinery, the key to fueling Rommel's desperate push eastward. Boone wanted to strike immediately. Bellamy argued they should wait for air support that would never come. The debate ended when El Fassi spotted their forward scout being executed by the Italians, burned with a flare and left as a warning. They attacked at dawn. The first shells struck the lead Italian truck, setting it ablaze. The Matildas rolled over a sand ridge and opened fire on the column, scattering men and camels alike. The desert turned into a cauldron of gunfire, smoke, and panic. But the Italians were not green. The Brigata Fantasma countered swiftly, using the terrain like veterans. Captain Boone's tank was hit twice, the second shot tearing off the turret. He survived with broken ribs and a shattered radio. Bellamy was killed by sniper fire while attempting to rig explosives on the mobile refinery. It was El Fassi who turned the tide. He led 2 men through a hidden ravine and flanked the Italian position, throwing grenades into their fuel reserves. The explosion was biblical. Flames rose like towers, and oil-black smoke darkened the sky for miles. The Axis convoy was annihilated, but so were half of Boone's men. The retreat was worse than the battle. With no radio and limited water, the survivors marched across 60 kilometers of sand dunes toward a free French outpost at Bourg el High. Several died from heat and exposure. El Fassi, delirious and barefoot, carried a wounded corporal on his back for 2 days. When they arrived, sunburned and half-mad, the French officer in charge refused to believe their story. "There is no Operation Dustveil," he said flatly. "You are deserters. Ghost chasers." The survivors were quarantined for a week. Eventually, a high-ranking British colonel from Cairo arrived and took their reports. He said nothing, gave them each a medal with no citation, and disappeared. Their story was buried, their names misfiled or erased. Boone returned to Texas and ran a cattle ranch with a glass eye. El Fassi disappeared into the desert after the war, last seen crossing into Mauritania. In 1971, a sandstorm unearthed a rusted Matilda tank near Wadi Saba. Inside were dog tags, a British service revolver, and a scorched leather notebook. The notes were barely legible but included a map, drawings of Italian vehicles, and 3 words written in English. "The sand remembers." Italian records uncovered decades later confirmed the existence of Brigata Fantasma, though Rome claimed it was never deployed beyond Tripoli. Yet a French oil company in the 1990s discovered layers of scorched sediment and fuel residue in the exact area the survivors described. No official history book includes Operation Dustveil. No memorial bears its name. But some desert nomads still whisper of a battle where tanks melted into the sand and the sun turned black. Yuki Sato was 13 when the sky fell. March 9, 1945, began like any other in the crowded district of Sumida, Tokyo. She rose at dawn to sweep the alley outside her family's tenement, the soot from nearby factories already staining her wooden sandals. Her mother folded futons while her younger brother, Haru, tried to catch a rat near the stove. The war had reduced meals to boiled millet and dried pumpkin, but the family endured. No one believed Tokyo would be hit again. Rumors said the Americans had spared the city for some secret reason, perhaps because Emperor Hirohito still walked its palace grounds. But that night, B-29s came, not with bombs meant to puncture buildings, but with canisters filled with napalm and petroleum jelly. The first explosions sounded like thunder. Yuki's father, a former teacher drafted into labor duty, wasn't home. Her mother screamed for them to grab what they could. Outside, the streets were chaos, people running, fires leaping from roof to roof like orange serpents. Haru clung to her hand, crying. "Don't let go," she told him. They ran toward the Sumida River, where others had gathered, hoping the water would be their shield. But the firestorm created its own wind, sucking air into the inferno and dragging people backward like leaves in a cyclone. Roof tiles flew like razors. A woman fell beside Yuki, her clothes already aflame. By the time they reached the riverbank, Haru was gone. Yuki didn't know when she lost him. One moment he was there, the next she was holding only air. She screamed his name until her throat bled, but the fire didn't care. She leapt into the water and clung to a floating door with 3 other children. By morning, Sumida was ash. Over 100,000 people died in the firebombing of Tokyo that night, many of them women and children. Yuki wandered through the ruins barefoot, her eyes swollen shut from smoke. She found her mother's hairpin near a collapsed school and buried it in a tin box behind what remained of their home. The documentary reframes these memories through Yuki's aged voice, recorded in 1992, her English soft and measured. "The fire had no direction," she says. "It ate rich and poor, soldier and child. It was not war. It was erasure." We meet Lieutenant Raymond Corbin next, an American B, 29 navigator. In archival footage, he's in his 80s, sitting beside a dusty globe. They told us we were burning factories, he says, but when you fly low enough, you see everything. Lanterns, laundry lines, dolls on balconies. Corbin never forgot what he saw that night. After the war, he left the Air Force and became a high school teacher in Oregon. He taught Japanese literature and insisted his students read Basho. His testimony was rejected from 2 post-war military panels as excessively remorseful. He wrote hundreds of letters to survivors. One of them reached Yuki. Their correspondence, which began in the 1960s and lasted 2 decades, is now read by actors in the film. Yuki's words, elegant and restrained, contrast Corbin's guilt-ridden tone. Yuki asterisk, I do not hate you. But the sky was yours that night, not mine. Corbin asterisk, I saw fire dance like it had a mind. That was your home. I helped erase it. They met only once, in 1983, at a peace conference in Kyoto. A grainy photo shows them side by side, holding hands. No one remembers what they said. But Yuki later wrote in her journal, asterisk, he carried the ashes too. Just in a different pocket. Asterisk. The documentary also includes accounts from others, survivors who recall jumping into canals filled with burning bodies, a priest who led a procession of children into a concrete tunnel that became an oven, and a nurse who stitched skin with twine. A Japanese-American internee, Aya Takeda, recounts watching the bombings from a Utah camp radio and feeling split in half, her government attacking her ancestors. Her family had been in Tokyo before the war. Somewhere out there, she says, we were killing cousins. In 2002, Japanese volunteers erected a hidden shrine beneath a rebuilt shopping district in Sumida. Yuki, then in her 70s, visited with her granddaughter. She placed a small wooden box under a cherry tree. Inside were Haru's sandals, or what was left of them, 2 burnt straps she had kept in silence for nearly 60 years. The shrine has no name. Tourists walk by it daily, unaware. The film ends with a scene of Tokyo at night, the skyline glittering with neon and glass. In voiceover, Yuki says, asterisk, what we rebuilt was not just a city, but the courage to remember it. The fire took many things, but not our voices. Asterisk. Yuki Sato died in 2011. Her letters with Corbin are now archived in the National Museum of War Memory in Hiroshima. She never found Haru's body. But every year on March 9th, someone leaves a paper lantern near the river. Just one. The barbed wire fence stretched endlessly across the frostbitten Polish countryside, enclosing the grim world of Camp Edelstein, a fictional subcamp buried deep in the annals of Nazi bureaucracy. Officially, it was listed as a satellite labor camp, built to support munitions production for the Wehrmacht. Unofficially, it was a place where prisoners disappeared, where no record keepers bothered to count days or names. But inside this forgotten place, something unexpected stirred. Ari Wexler arrived at Edelstein in November 1943. A 34-year-old violinist from Vienna, he had once played to packed auditoriums and royal halls. His career, however, ended the day his name was struck from the program lists for being Jewish. Ari was arrested while trying to smuggle his elderly mother across the Slovak border. She died in transport. He survived and was sent east. In Edelstein, he labored by day hauling iron rails and clearing frozen ditches, and at night, in the corners of Block 11, he hummed Vivaldi under his breath to keep the cold at bay. His fingers, blistered and cracked, still moved in phantom concertos. It was in early January 1944 that the idea of the orchestra was born, not as resistance, but as memory. A Ukrainian political prisoner, Petro Zelenko, had constructed a crude mandolin out of scrap wood and barbed wire. Ari saw it and said simply, "Give me a week." He scavenged, begged, and bartered with other prisoners. A piece of a bed frame became a neck. Strings were unraveled from twisted fencing. A paintbrush handle became a bow. After 10 days, a misshapen but functional violin was born. They called it the Iron Violin. Ari played it in the latrines first, where the wind masked the sound. A Hungarian cellist named Rebecca joined with a makeshift drum. Then came a clarinet made from bone and copper pipe. Within weeks, 6 instruments existed, each a Frankenstein of waste and ingenuity. They played softly, always softly, lest the guards hear. Music by candlelight, beneath broken beams, while the dead were wheeled out behind them. Then something miraculous happened. A block supervisor named Klaus Baumer, an aging Wehrmacht conscript posted at Edelstein to escape the front, heard them. He didn't shout, didn't report it. The next night, he appeared in the doorway and simply said, "Play Bach." Ari did. Baumer became their silent guardian. He smuggled them a real string from a downed German officer's violin. He whispered when roll calls would be longer or when SS inspectors would visit. In return, he asked only that they play Schubert on his birthday. Word spread. The prisoners began to gather after curfew in the tunnels below the laundry, where the frost couldn't bite and the walls couldn't echo. They came not to listen, but to remember. Mothers sang lullabies. Elderly men wept into their sleeves. The orchestra played requiems for those taken at dawn. They called themselves Orchestra Sieni, the Orchestra of Shadows. By spring, their secret was a poorly kept one. But Edelstein's commandant, SS Hauptsturmführer Meinhardt, ignored it. He believed art was weakness. He believed they would die soon anyway. But they didn't. On May 12, 1944, a typhus outbreak struck Edelstein. Hundreds fell ill. The camp turned feral. The orchestra ceased playing. Death crept closer. Ari, burning with fever, could no longer hold the violin. Rebecca was executed after stealing bread for a sick girl. Petro died in the infirmary, his mandolin cradled against his chest. The music stopped. But not for long. A Czech teenager named Ilsa found the violin buried beneath floorboards. She had listened every night for months. Though she had no training, she plucked notes into the silence. Her version of Kol Nidra brought even the guards to stillness. Baumer wept for the first time in his life. By January 1945, the Red Army was near. Meinhardt fled with most of the SS. The camp collapsed in on itself. Prisoners wandered, half-mad, unsure if they were liberated or simply forgotten. When Soviet troops arrived, they found Ari barely alive, curled beside the remains of his violin. The neck was broken, the strings unraveling like veins. He survived. In the years that followed, the story of Camp Edelstein and its shadow orchestra was buried beneath bureaucratic rubble. Soviet records listed it as a minor recovery zone. Western historians, lacking evidence, deemed it unverified. But in 1978, a Polish schoolteacher restoring an old bomb shelter near the camp ruins found a tin box sealed in wax. Inside were parchment fragments, sheet music, lyrics scribbled in German, Yiddish, and Czech, and a note signed, asterisk, to those who listened even when it was dangerous. Asterisk. The iron violin was later discovered in a Krakow museum archive, miscategorized as camp debris. After restoration, it was displayed in a small exhibit titled Voices of Silence. Ari Wexler moved to London after the war. He never performed professionally again, but he gave free lessons in a park to anyone who asked. He died in 1986. His student, a British-Israeli composer named Daniel Lev, wrote a symphony based on the rhythms of Edelstein's orchestra. In its final movement, a lone violin plays a slow, haunting version of Eli Eli, punctuated by distant drumbeats made from recorded sounds of iron and bone. At the end of the film, survivors read their testimonies in darkness. A spotlight falls on the iron violin, now housed behind glass. No strings remain. But in the background, faintly, very faintly, you can hear someone tuning it. The final days of World War II were chaos incarnate. Berlin was a broken city, its buildings shattered and its sewers flowing with blood. The Red Army was encircling it from the east while remnants of the Nazi regime clung to every block like a dying animal. In this chaos, amidst the collapse of fronts and the confusion of orders, a single U.S. reconnaissance platoon vanished behind enemy lines, never officially acknowledged, never fully explained. They were known only by their radio call sign, Echo 17. Sergeant Alonzo Wright led them. A decorated African-American radio operator from Detroit, Wright had earned 2 Bronze Stars in the Ardennes for keeping comms open under fire. Echo 17 had been assigned to monitor Soviet movements as part of a last-minute liaison mission ahead of Berlin's fall. Their job was to set up temporary signal relays near the Elbe and return before the Soviets advanced further. But on April 20, 1945, under gray skies and confused orders, Echo 17 took a wrong turn near Magdeburg. By the time Wright realized the error, they were deep inside the Soviet zone. Their map was outdated. Their radio was damaged by shrapnel. Soviet forces, suspecting infiltration, fired on them without warning. The Americans retreated into the outskirts of Berlin, unaware they had crossed a front line. There, in the bombed-out husk of a rail station, they met the Black Torch, a German underground resistance group made up of deserters, communists, Jews in hiding, and even former Wehrmacht officers who had turned on Hitler in the war's final weeks. Their leader was Franz Keller, a one-eyed ex-lieutenant who wore a tattered SS uniform with the insignia ripped off. "We're all ghosts here," Keller told Wright in fluent English. "But ghosts can still pull triggers." Wright, realizing they could neither return nor survive on their own, agreed to join forces. Together, Echo 17 and the Black Torch formed an unlikely alliance, launching ambushes on SS convoys, sabotaging fuel depots, and evacuating Jewish children hidden in church crypts. They operated from the tunnels of the Berlin U-Bahn, where the rumble of collapsing buildings echoed like drums of judgment. Private Danny Lugo, a Puerto Rican marksman from New York, kept a journal in a hollowed-out ration tin. In one entry, he wrote, "Asterisk, we're not in the war anymore. We're under it. Asterisk." The platoon's medic, Corporal Janice McKenna, one of the first women attached to forward recon under special clearance, performed surgeries by candlelight in a subway restroom. She saved over 30 civilians in 2 weeks. The final operation came on May 1st. Soviet artillery was shelling the city non-stop. The SS had begun executing prisoners to prevent their liberation. The Black Torch learned of one such execution site near the Spree River, a warehouse holding political prisoners, including one of their founders. Echo 17 voted unanimously to act. They attacked just before dawn, using Molotovs and stolen grenades. The battle was brutal. Keller was shot through the neck. Lugo lost an eye. But they freed 43 prisoners and destroyed a last-minute SS communications relay. Soviet tanks arrived minutes later and mistook them for enemies. Wright rushed forward with his arms raised, shouting in broken Russian. A young Soviet lieutenant hesitated. Then a Soviet officer, drunk and enraged from the death of his brother the day before, ordered fire. 2 members of Echo 17 were killed instantly. The others were disarmed and imprisoned. Wright was taken to a temporary Soviet command post near Karlshorst. There, a translator interrogated him for 3 days. Soviet officers refused to believe his story. To them, he was either OSS or a German collaborator. His skin color confused the narrative further. No black American soldier, they claimed, would be in a recon unit. Keller's body was dumped in a mass grave. McKenna disappeared. Lugo was sent to a POW camp in Minsk, where he died of infection in 1946. Wright, after intense diplomatic pressure, was released in late 1945 and returned to the U.S. in silence. The military buried the mission. Echo 17 had gone missing during a routine recon patrol. No mention of Berlin. No mention of the Black Torch. Wright spent the rest of his life working in a post office in Chicago. He never spoke publicly about what happened. But in 1982, shortly before his death, he mailed a box to a local historian. Inside was Lugo's ration tin journal, a faded Berlin street map marked with escape routes, and a medal with Soviet writing, "To the Liberators of Berlin," awarded, unofficially, by a rogue Soviet officer who had later defected. In 1997, fragments of these records were uncovered by a German filmmaker researching underground resistance. The story of Echo 17 and the Black Torch became the subject of a controversial documentary titled The Battalion That Vanished, banned in Russia but awarded internationally. No American monument bears their names. No textbook tells their tale. But in the tunnels beneath Berlin's Friedrichstrasse station, graffiti etched into the stone reads, Echo 17, we fought where the map ended. And in a quiet cemetery in Detroit, Sergeant Alonzo Wright rests beneath a plain headstone. Every year, on May 1st, someone leaves a folded map beside it. The documents may be lost. The witnesses, long gone. But the shadows still move if you listen closely. These were the unspeakable truths, the moral fractures hidden beneath medals and treaties. You've opened the box, and the names inside are calling. You can't unhear them. You can't unknow them. Now the question is, will you look away, or will you remember what the world was told to forget?